Welcome to Journey to Healing. Do you find yourself discouraged, troubled, in need of healing, but not sure where to turn? Jon Uhler, a licensed professional counselor, is here to help. Jon has more than 25 years of professional experience helping people deal with the issues that keep them emotionally and spiritually stuck. There is help. There is hope. There is a God who loves you and wants to help you find peace and strength. And Jon Uhler is here to help you find that on this edition of Journey to Healing.
And welcome back. I am Jon Uhler. This is Journey to Healing, and we have a very special guest with us tonight, a very special program, as we have been talking about the issue of boundaries. We've been talking about the overall topic of grief and loss, but until we are able to implement boundaries in the here and now, we are not going to be able to deal with issues in the past. And so that's why it's so important to have boundaries. If we don't, then we are ripe for, as we've been talking about, the pigs in our lives, very selfish people that can end up manipulating us and even worse. We have a special guest. Her name is Anne, and Anne has an incredible story. It's actually a miraculous story because she was nearly, there's no other way to put it, she came close to death at the hands of domestic violence, someone that she trusted very much, who was her husband. Anne, thank you so much for joining us on Journey to Healing.
Thank you for having me, Jon. Hello, everyone.
Well, Anne, you have been sharing your story with me, and I felt it was too compelling not to share with those that have been through a lot, or for those that want to better understand how to help those that have been through a lot, especially domestic violence. And as we've been talking about on Journey to Healing, we've been talking about the importance of boundaries, the importance of intuition in being able to set boundaries, and how those that have given themselves permission to grow in their selfishness, that have morphed into selfish pigs, the kind that Jesus said we should not be around. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 6, he says, "Do not cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample your pearls and turn on you and become self-injurious." And the thing about pigs is, and again, we're not name-calling, it's simply a descriptive term for someone that has become an extreme manipulator, extremely selfish, who has given themselves permission to become selfish. And as selfishness grows, the ability to become hurtful becomes ever more pronounced. And to continue to hurt someone, you have to become very adept at manipulating. Your story is one that is filled with a number of situations where you were on the receiving end of very hurtful behavior, very hurtful things at the hands of very profound manipulators. And little by little, that impacted your ability to discern your intuition, which is the key mechanism by which we can discern. And therefore, ultimately, it affected your ability to have boundaries. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely.
As you had described to me, you had an experience at the age of 15 that I think a lot of people will unfortunately be able to relate to. You experienced a sexual assault while you were on the job as a 15-year-old, and you weren't able to share that, so you had to keep that to yourself. And that became one of a number of things that set you up for not being able to be sure then of what you were experiencing later on when you got married. Do you want to walk us through, to whatever extent you're comfortable with that, so then that sets the stage for what you're going to share with us?
Sure. So I wasn't on the job, but it was a place that my best friend and I used to hang out all the time. It was a local pizza shop because my girlfriend had a crush on one of the kids that we went to high school with, and he worked there. And there were 3 or 4 other guys that worked there, and they were beside the student we went to school with. The other gentlemen were probably 30. In fact, one of them was probably close to 50. And we would go and have pizza and play music in the jukebox and stuff, and hang out for a while and go do something else. Oftentimes, we would help clean up if we stayed late. That was just something we did. And towards the back of the pizza shop, there was probably only, I'm going to say 4 or 5 booths. Most people just came in and picked up and carried out. In the back, there was a restroom, a public restroom for customers, and then the back door. And I had been in the restroom and I came out, and as I came out, one of the gentlemen was opening up the back door to take out the trash. So I held the door and then, started helping to do that. And after we took out the trash, he grabbed me and took me. The employees would park their cars in the back. He grabbed me and led me to his car, and was just trying to sweet talk me, and said, I want to talk to you about something. And I was like, what about? I guess in the moment, I was a little hesitant, but I was like, okay, nothing ever happened bad before. I'm fine. I'm safe. I know these people. They're not strangers. But he raped me, and he used a condom. I guess I'm grateful for that, if there's a silver lining. But he was a married man. He had a wife and kids, and I was, I guess when I came in, I was kind of like a robot. I was stunned or shocked or numb. I didn't really know how to process any of that. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my best friend. I never told my parents. I never went to authorities. I was ashamed, for sure. And I was young. I was 15. How does a 15-year-old digest that? I pushed it down and didn't deal with it. I just try to move on. And I know that has hindered my choices in life with men. When I was 21, I got married, and I dated my husband probably for about 14 months prior to that. And he was the epitome of what I thought a husband should be. He was a gentleman, opened doors, please and thank you, didn't drink, didn't smoke. We got married, and within 2 months, things started to become controlling. He kind of chose what I wore, and I wasn't allowed to wear makeup. And if I was going grocery shopping, he pretty much timed how long it would take me to get there and get home. And if I didn't get home within the allotted time he thought it would take, he'd pick a fight and then leave the house. And I was always upset and thinking I did something wrong and broken. And I was trying to raise my daughter, who was not his biological daughter, and function as a wife. But it was difficult. he made it difficult, and he kept chipping away at me. And each time it became more shocking, I guess. Then it was, he was the only one that got the mail. I worked in a manufacturing plant, and of course there's a lot of men there. I would walk through the plant, do my job, and not really make eye contact with them. It was kind of, hello, this is what I need, thank you, and go on my way. And that's not at all who I am. I'm a very social person, very inclusive of everyone. But I never felt that I could be really who I was, because I felt like my husband was clipping my wings. I was always afraid that somehow he'd find out. I don't know how he would find out. He didn't know anybody at my job. He had never been there. But it was tough. It was tough to live day to day, and again, still function as a mother and take care of my child. There were times where, we were going to get a family photo done at JCPenney, and he couldn't find his belt. He had been out the night before after picking a fight and making it my fault, which it never was my fault. But that was his way to pick a fight and leave and be angry, and I think go drink and do drugs, because I still hadn't known about that part of his personality. And he couldn't find his belt. And again, it was my fault. But he tore apart our apartment, flipped the mattress, and, the baby's crying. She was about maybe 18 months then. I'm stressed, and I'm thinking, we're going to have a family portrait. How am I going to pull that off? Found the belt and took the photo, and I no longer have that photo. But thinking back, I think if you were to look at me in that photo, I was a shell of a person. I was just a robot walking around, being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, why. And it was tough.
And it is interesting, as you were talking about JCPenney photos, I couldn't help but think how many churches have a day for their photo directory, where obviously the families spend time getting ready for that, what amounts to a family portrait, and how telling now that we can see behind the scenes, preparing for what looks like a wonderful family photo. There's a whole different story to that family that's going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
The manipulators are professional once you get to the professional grade. They're professional at chipping away at the person's self-esteem. You mentioned that they're professional at little by little getting the person to question themselves, to doubt themselves, because the person they thought they knew, meaning you, the person you thought you knew as your spouse, and you dated him, as you say, he was a perfect gentleman. And again, I couldn't help but think of how many people meet somebody in church. We would never assume that a manipulator or a predator goes to church specifically to find someone, because then they have a large pool of potential dates that they can begin to establish a relationship with, a large pool of people that tend to want to give someone the benefit of the doubt. And that's all a manipulator needs, an abuser needs, little by little, to begin to tie the person up in knots. So the abuser has a plan. They just haven't filled the victim in on that plan. And so little by little things unfold and you end up questioning yourself. And as you indicated to me off air, that there were a number of red flags, but one of those that began to really open your eyes is when he showed up with a vehicle that he said he purchased for you, but that was not the case.
No, that was not at all the case. I was tired of being second fiddle to the many women that he was meeting, dating, and whatever he was doing. And I was trying to save my marriage. We took vows in front of God, and they meant something to me. And evidently, they didn't mean anything to him. I said, well, we're going to go on a date. You and I, husband and wife, be here at this time. Otherwise, I'm going alone. And he came home, and I was all dressed up, ready to go. And he came home with this car. And I had asked where he got it, and he said a friend of his and mentioned his name, and it wasn't any friend that I had met or heard of before. Okay, whatever. So we went to my mom's house. I drove my vehicle because it had the car seat to my mom's house to drop off my daughter so she could watch her, so my husband and I could go out on a date and kind of start all over from the beginning. That was kind of my thinking. And then we took the car that he bought for me. We're driving, and he pulls over and says, well, I think you should drive. It was kind of a sporty little car, and I said, I don't want to drive. He's like, no, I really think you should. Okay, well, I didn't want the night to go bad, so I just gave in and said, okay. I got in the driver's seat, and we were driving to the highway. Get on the highway. It's probably about 6 o'clock, so rush hour is still around, but not as heavy as earlier. I see flashers and a siren behind me. So I looked at my speedometer, and I was doing, 57, 58. So I thought, oh, it's not for me. And I kept driving. And the cop pulled up next to us and came on the loudspeaker and said, you need to pull over now. So I pulled off on the shoulder, and I looked at my husband, and I was like, what have you done? And my whole life is flashing before me. I'm thinking of my daughter. Oh my gosh, they're going to take her away from me. What is going on? And then I'm getting out. I'm thinking I'm going to get out of this car. And is anybody driving by that knows me? I mean, it's not my car, but if I get out of the car, are they going to recognize me? I was mortified. So the police officer came over and went to the passenger side first and took my husband out, cuffed him, and put him in the squad car. Then he came back to the driver's side and asked for my license and registration. So I said, well, here's my license. Registration, I guess, is in the glove box. And he's like, what do you mean, you guess? And I said, well, my husband just came home with this car today. He bought it from a friend of his. And he goes, well, can we look for the registration together? I said, sure. So he came over to the passenger side, and we opened the glove box, and we found the registration, and it had a guy's name on it. And he says, this car has been reported stolen. Your husband didn't buy this car. I don't know what's going on in your life and in your marriage, but you really need to look at some things because it's the brother of your husband's girlfriend that owns this vehicle. And again, I'm ready to just get sick on the side of the highway. The cop had to cuff me and put me in the squad as well. Drove down to the police station. They took my husband out and booked him. And the cop gave me $20 and had me call a cab. And ironically, that was the first time I ever took a taxi. I went to my mom's house and got my car and went home. I left my daughter there and went and got her the next morning. In the meantime, my husband at the time was calling me, come bail me out, come bail me out. I'm like, no. Like, I needed time to digest what was going on. But then his girlfriend, I guess, bailed him out, and he showed up at the house after I went and got my daughter, and her and I were laying across the bed taking a nap, and we were in a top floor apartment of a 2-family house, and he just climbed up the balcony. He was 6'2", and he jumped from the bottom balcony to the bottom of our balcony and climbed over and came in that door, because that door we typically didn't lock. And then came in and was angry at me and who was there and who spent the night. And I'm like, I'm just trying to deal with one shocking situation, and now you're throwing something else at me that didn't even happen. But that was kind of my life.
And that was one of the times you began to be aware that there might be somebody else, that he might not just be sort of looking at other women, but he might be involved with other women. When did that really sink in, that he was being unfaithful?
I guess my gut always told me that that was probably going on, but I had no viable evidence. And I was afraid to say anything, to even question it. Because, I got the speech about, I want a family that's traditional. The man rules the house. You have no say. You do as I say. And, that wasn't how I was raised. I mean, I was raised in a traditional Italian family, but both my parents had say, and they would talk to each other about everything. And, that's what I had envisioned growing up of my husband. And it was so far from that.
So behind the scenes, Anne, as you were trying to figure out, in a way, who this guy is that you have married, before you know it, you're riding in a stolen vehicle. You come back. Your daughter had been staying with your mother, so you retrieve your daughter. You're there. He, in essence, almost breaks in. Before you know it, the husband that spent the night in jail is now standing in the apartment. And you had mentioned that was the first time that you began to become actually fearful for your life.
Yeah, because actually that evening was the first time that he had pulled a knife on me and slept in the bed with a knife in my back. Well, I didn't sleep, but yeah. Again,
this is all too familiar for those that have survived domestic violence. It takes place both in and out of churches. I think it takes place in churches a lot more than anybody wants to know. So behind the scenes, when no one's watching, these guys are incrementally morphing into not just selfish pigs and not just manipulators, but actually megalomaniacs, men that are able to intimidate, to generate fear, and to cause their wife, little by little, to second guess herself, and then to be able to accept or be willing to accept eventually the most outlandish behavior, whether it be pornography, whether it be other women, and eventually they may even start to require of the wife things that she would never, ever have guessed that she would have ever tolerated. We have about 2 minutes left before we take our break. Why don't you speak to that, and then we will actually then pick up on the other side of the break when the significant event happened that almost cost you your life. So how did you start to be on the receiving end of things that you never would have guessed as far as his treatment of you and then involving other women?
I guess that period of my life, I just kind of went through the motions. I was working and trying to provide for my child. I was trying to make a cohesive family. I was trying to be a good wife, obey him, as he said. But he totally took that out of context. The vows in front of God of obeying are not at all about imprisonment and control. And I guess the final straw was when I received a telephone bill for $3,000 because he had been calling 1-900 numbers. And I had to fight with the phone company to, not pay that. I couldn't afford that. And gingerly tiptoe around questioning him, why and how that happened. Again, it was another shocking item that was revealed to me.
And of course, he had gotten you to a point where you had started to become very fearful, physically fearful of him. So he had introduced physical intimidation. And that would escalate to a very dramatic moment where you literally probably were going to die unless a miracle happened. And we will look into, and we'll have you explain what happened in your significant situation when we come back from the other, or on the other side of the break, when we come back from our break. So, folks, stay right there, and we will be back with Anne in the second part of Journey to Healing.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insight into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. Developed by Jon Uhler, a seasoned therapist with years of experience working with sexual abuse survivors, SurvivorSupport.net is a one-of-a-kind resource to help you understand the impact of abuse and to help you understand the nature of those who harmed you, in order to help you gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with Jon Uhler about your situation, or in having Jon conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, and your monthly support or one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jon Uhler. This is Journey to Healing, and we are in the midst of a very special interview. with a woman by the name of Anne who has agreed to share her story of significant domestic violence that almost cost her her life. We chronicled her life at the point or leading up to marriage with what she thought was a very decent man, only to find out that he was something very, very different than what he had portrayed. We are picking up at this point as Anne had described some events that opened her eyes to the reality that this man that she had married was not only very different, almost Jekyll and Hyde, but he was capable of very significant things. He had gotten into a lot of pornography, but he had also introduced a lot of threats and infidelity into the relationship. So by the time Anne had an inkling that something was going on, he had already made her fearful to ask any significant questions. And that is what these manipulators do. That is what these predators do. So Anne, thank you again for being willing to share your story. And it had been, how many months? 18 months of progressive boundary violation or overriding your boundaries, overriding your intuition, causing you to kind of second guess yourself, to where it led up to a point where before you knew it, here was somebody that you thought you knew, but was now, I'm looking at the dog in the background. It's our dog, Stanley. Stanley wants in on the action here. But before you knew it, the man you thought you could trust turned out to be somebody very different and had actually begun to be very unfaithful to you.
Yes. There was a point where after the stolen vehicle and after numerous arguments and shoving and pushing and bruises on my body, there was one time I had gotten out of the shower and was in the bedroom in front of the mirror, naked, and he came up behind me to give me what normally would be a touching hug, and I looked at his eyes in the mirror and I thought, he doesn't even see the bruises, and there were bruises all over me. Now, when I was dressed for work or whatever, you couldn't see it. It was never my face. And I knew then that I needed to start making a plan. I spoke to someone my mom worked with. Her husband was a police officer. He gave me all the tools I needed and where I needed to go, and I was kind of setting that up. And my husband had come home with his girlfriend, the one that he had stole the brother's car, which I didn't figure out till later that was all connected. And she was pregnant by him. And he said, she's going to live with us. You have nothing to say about it. And this is how it is. Okay. So went off to work trying to digest that. My concern is safety, keeping my daughter safe, myself safe. And ironically, I didn't mind having her there because for like a week prior to my incident, he treated me probably the best he had treated me, since we had gotten married, because I'm sure he didn't want to show that side to her. And the night that everything happened, it was May of 1993, his girlfriend and I were in the kitchen making dinner. He left. He went, I'm assuming, drinking. And I told her, I said, he's either going to come home so drunk that he passes out or pick a fight. And she kind of looked at me like, really? I think she never saw any of that. Kind of like how it was with me when I first met him and dated him for that first 14 months. And for some strange reason, there was just something in my head that I decided to hide all the knives in my kitchen. He came in, he started to pick a fight with me, was accusing me of having an affair. Well, his pregnant girlfriend sits on my couch. I was trying to deny that I was not having an affair, because I wasn't. And then, I was getting kicked in the head, hit with this metal pipe. He was trying to burn me with a curling iron. This went on for like 6 hours. So I finally thought, I was focused on staying coherent because I needed to make sure that my child was safe. She was in her bedroom sleeping, and I just wanted to remove him from the house. If I could remove him from the house and then somehow get back there to get my daughter, then I could leave and never look back. And somehow I convinced him that I was having an affair. I was having an affair. I'll take you to his house. He's married too, but I know where he lives. And he bought it. And we went. He had me drive. I had blood all over my face. One eye was swollen shut. Blood down my shirt. I'm driving. And it's, 1:30 in the morning. So I drove to the busiest area of the city where the prostitutes and drug dealers would be at that time, because they're people, and I'm hoping people would help me. And the girlfriend obviously was scared, which I get that. We were at a red light, and if coming towards us at the other side of the red light is a cop car. Well, my husband had a knife to my throat the entire time, and when he saw the cop, he lowered it to my side, and he said, don't flash your lights, don't speed, don't draw attention. And I didn't. The light turned green, the cop turned, then we got the green light, and I went, and it was about 45 miles an hour, and I thought, I didn't want to die today. If I'm going to die today, it's because I choose to die. And by the grace of God, he was with me that day, because I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I just jumped out of the car. I never looked back. I started running down the middle of the street, lost my shoes. A car was driving by, and it was a gentleman in a button-down shirt and dress slacks, I guess. At that time of night, he was probably either buying drugs or going to pick up a prostitute. But I needed someone to help me, and I flagged him down. He stopped. He put his window down a little bit, and I hung on to his car door for dear life. I didn't, I thought if he starts driving away, I'm still going to hang on. I have to. This is my only chance, maybe. He let me in the car. He realized I was very scared. And I said, you need to take me to the police station. My husband's trying to kill me. We drove a couple blocks. I had lost my sense of direction. We weren't far from the police station. There were police officers coming out of roll call, probably 5 of them. And the biggest officer I saw, I ran to their leg and clung to it like a little kid would. I was so terrified. I was terrified. I wasn't scared. I was terrified. And they took me inside, and they took photos and had me get cleaned up. And then we called my mom. We sent another cop to go get my daughter. And we met my mom at the hospital. The police were great with my daughter. They let her play with the siren. She was happy. Didn't realize that something tragic had gone on. And she was like 3.5 at the time. And my mom showed up, and they brought a psychologist in because so many people go back. And I said, well, I'm not going back. This is it. I'm done. I can't go back because I won't survive. And they gave my mom a list of shelters, and my mom tore it up. She's like, she doesn't need this. She's coming home with me. I'm not afraid of him. so I'm going to take her home with me. And I went home with my mom that night. And for 3 days, he was on the run. Afterwards, I found out that he had stripped down to just his boxer shorts and no shirt and walked home to the apartment. And in that 3 days, he pawned all my electronics. He sold my furniture. So I was not only trying to gather my thoughts about establishing my safety, I had to get all new things. And he sold clothes and everything. Anything he could get money for. I also, when they caught him, I went to the apartment and the girlfriend was still there. And I asked her to leave. I said, "You're not on the lease. You need to leave." I called my landlord, told her what happened. Gratefully, she allowed me to break the lease. And cleaning out the apartment, I found a statement that I needed to be in court the next day. My husband had wrote a check on a checking account that we had closed. So I went and paid the bill, paid the fine on it, was to Target, and I went to court and represented myself. Face all bruised, one eye still swollen. I had a bruise from underneath my rib cage down to my knee that was just black. I had a couple teeth knocked out. And, the judge asked me, "How many more checks are there?" I said, "I don't know. I didn't even know that this had happened." And then he was like, "Well, what happened to your face?" "Well, my husband tried to kill me, but that's not why I'm here." So I was trying to take care of that issue. They charged me with theft or fraud, and it would stay on my record for a year, but could be expunged if nothing same or similar happened in that year. And of course, nothing did. And they gave me a 3-month period.
Let me make sure I just understood what you said. So there you are, just literally a day or two after, fleeing for your life. You've got all these bruises on you. And you're trying to take care of a bill, and they were anything compassionate?
Compassionate in the sense that, if nothing same or similar happened in the year of probation, I would be fine and it would be expunged. They gave me 45 days to allow any other checks to come through because I didn't know. Did he take a whole check, book of checks and write a bunch of them? And I'm going to have to pay other things? I didn't know because I didn't even know that one happened until I found that paper.
So that would be a crucial point for women right now. Well, either gender, but typically. So you have a controlling guy. If a woman doesn't know the state of her finances, what would you recommend?
My recommendation is you should always keep separate accounts and have a house account. If you're getting married or living with someone and you bought the house together, or you decide your living arrangements that you're going to split finances, then have a joint account for that and only put your portion in there. Nothing more. Always keep your own account.
Well, and certainly be able to account for where the money's going. And do not accept any kind of answer from your spouse that says, well, you don't need to know. No, you need to know. This is your life. And there you are, unfortunately, a classic example then of how the law sort of views this. You just nearly died. You come to find out that there's this debt, and the law is not all, although I still can't believe it, but you lived through it. So there they are telling you that you're all banged up, yet somehow the focus is on your irresponsibility because of what your abusive husband had done with the money, while you were unaware of what he was doing with the money.
So with all of that, in that whole marriage, there was a lot of shame and guilt for me because I was ashamed of it. I wasn't going to run around and tell people the things that happened, but living it as it was happening, I felt guilty that I didn't know until after the fact some of these things. Because when we finally did go to court and I got my restraining order and then we went to court for the assault, he was charged with terroristic threats. And in that time, it opened a can of worms. And I found out that he had been married to 2 other women while he had been married to me. So I pushed the courts to charge him with bigamy. And they thought I was crazy. And I, saying that he wouldn't get more time. And for me, it wasn't about more time. It was about, I wanted to be left alone. And it was about creating that paper trail. This is a habitual liar who is controlling of women. And it's a law. He broke it. I charge him with it. And they did.
And that is so crucial because there will be some people listening that will think that is, quote unquote, unforgiving. And as I have camped on the podcast, that we have really not dealt with this level of severity as far as domestic violence goes. But to help people understand that forgiveness is granted when forgiveness is warranted, meaning when someone is broken and contrite, when they've established fruits of repentance. This man certainly was none of that, had nothing. He had, as far as any kind of desire to be forgiven, and therefore it's very appropriate to think in terms of that paper trail so that you can protect yourself, so that you can, in wisdom, create enough evidence so that the court takes you seriously, that this man is not who he claims to be, because they are professional grade liars that can look at you straight in the eye and lie with the best of them. And they are so believable.
Absolutely. And I guess the kicker with it was when I went to the church after I found this out and they charged him with bigamy. I wanted to get my marriage annulled because it never felt like a marriage after all that. And the church would not annul my marriage. I had to file for a divorce. They said, you are legally married. You have to get legally divorced. And I'm like, I wasn't legally married. He had been married to 2 other women. There was nothing legal about that, but they wouldn't honor that.
So to say the least, you didn't get a lot of support from your church. Let me change topics just for a moment, but since we've now just introduced the idea of church, in my estimation, churches do not do a good job supporting those that are on the receiving end of domestic violence. What should pastors, what should clergy, what should church members know as far as how can they help? What are the warning signs, what to look for, and what does a domestic survivor need that a church could provide if a church began to think carefully about this whole issue?
I think one of the first warning signs would be not making eye contact when a female is speaking to a male, whether it's the priest or a lay person, especially in the company of their spouse. And at that time, from my experience, my spouse would lay his hand on my shoulder, and then someone would ask me a question, and then he'd answer for me. And then I, of course, would smile and agree. And, outwardly, everything was fine, but it wasn't. And you hope that just one person recognizes something without you having to say anything. Because for me, you don't trust your own instincts. You don't trust anyone else. You're just trying to survive. You're just trying to survive.
So there are warning signs that if a church wants to be a place of refuge, because there are a lot of victims that are currently sitting in churches, so that would be one of the key things that a church could educate its members about, educate the leadership about. What are the warning signs? So you gave a very valuable one, which is if, as they communicate with a couple, and they ask, so one might be, make sure you ask both spouses some questions. Let's say you're getting to know them or just in conversation. So don't keep conversation going with just one of the spouses. Ask both and then watch. Now, this isn't to mean that we should set off on missions to determine whether or not, then I think it changes the nature of interaction in a church, but to be very mindful that there are those warning signs. So, Anne, you just mentioned that one would be if you see one spouse answering for the other, that would be a warning sign. What might also be some additional warning signs that people in a church could look for to begin to get a sense that things are not okay?
I was very meek, and I never, I was robotic. I always had a smile on my face, but I think if you really looked into my eyes, you'd see that there was lack of emotion there, or fear, perhaps. I don't know if the church could be a safe haven in the sense that I know there are some places where they have an underground connection to get women out of very abusive situations. But the one thing too you have to think about is it would depend on if your spouse is okay with going to church, because if they're so controlling that they don't want to do that, because obviously their biggest thing is to isolate. They're going to control what you do. If you have groups at church, Bible study, whatever, likely they're not going to be involved in that, because then you're around more people. And if you're around more people, there's a chance that somebody might catch on. And the abuser doesn't want that.
So let me stick with the idea of a church. What can a church do? So as you've described it, an abuser is very controlling. He's very mindful of anybody that tries to interact with the wife that he's holding hostage, essentially. Mm-hmm. So how could we get through to the spouse, to the significant other, that there is help available? How would that be possible?
I don't know. My church wasn't very supportive in my life. So I just relied on my faith and built my relationship with Jesus outside of the church. I don't know what a church could do, but I would be happy to set something up with a church, because nobody, man or woman, needs to live in terror. And people have to have that emotional intelligence to pick up on sometimes it's just a word or two, maybe not what you say, but how you say it. The inflection in your voice is a cry for help. And I think somebody who's been in that type of relationship is more aware of those things than somebody who's not, who hasn't been. So I don't know what that would look like.
I think that would be an important thing for churches to begin to think through, to get together with people that have survived domestic violence, to begin to ask what would have been helpful. I'm thinking of even some sort of like a business card that you could slip into the hands of a survivor, because the abuser is probably going to be pretty watchful.
They watch everything. They watch everything. And, when I went through my situation in 93, I didn't have a cell phone, which probably was a good thing, because he would have controlled that. And I didn't have any friends. Like, he isolated me from my family and my friends. Like, the only person I saw really was my mom. I have a brother. I didn't see him once, maybe, during that time.
So that would be something for family members and friends to become mindful of, that if you have someone that used to be close to you but has begun to kind of drift away, as it were, or not be as available, then maybe something else is going on that you need to begin to ask directly. Are you okay? Are things okay? And we've got about 2 minutes left or so. Any thoughts as far as if you are talking to a domestic violence survivor right now? What words of encouragement, what admonition, as it were, what do you have to say to help them know that they can get out, and how to do that?
You have to just find one person you can trust, whether it's your best friend, it could be your UPS driver that drops off packages while we were in this pandemic. And if you're afraid to speak up, because that's what you're used to not doing, is speaking up for yourself, there are other ways to give a signal. Roll your eyes, make hand signals. There are ways to do that. If you have a job, a lot of companies today have benefits where you can call anonymously to a line for help. If you have a good working relationship with your manager, speak to your manager. Tell them that you need help. And do they have resources that you could tap into, and that you need, you have to do everything secretively, because it could put your life in jeopardy. It could put your life in jeopardy more than it already is.
You have to risk. If you've gotten to a point where you fear for your safety, you fear for your life, you have to risk. It probably is only going to get better. And the perpetrator, the professional grade selfish pig, is counting on you maintaining the secrets and maintaining the silence. And you have to risk. That's where Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 comes in. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your path. There comes a point in time where you just have to reach out and risk. And thank you for being on the program. You were about to say something before we sign off.
Yeah, that day I took a risk, because I was choosing not to die at his hands. If I were to die that day, it was because I chose to jump.
And talk about a leap of faith. And thank you. We'll plan on having you back at some point in time as you continue your healing. Maybe we'll talk about the effects of PTSD and how that can linger, how that's a very real phenomenon, not just for military veterans, but also survivors of domestic violence and folks that have survived sexual assault. those things sink in deep and can have an ongoing effect. So if you'd be willing, we'll have you back.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John.
And folks, we will be back next week on Journey to Healing.
You've been listening to Journey to Healing, sponsored by SurvivorSupport.net. We trust you've been helped by the information our host, Jon Uhler, has shared. To donate to this ministry, schedule a personal consultation with Jon, or to arrange a professional training for your church or organization with Jon, simply visit our website. On behalf of Survivor Support, we look forward to hearing from you and to have you join us next time on Journey to Healing.